Ladies and gentlemen, I was most flattered and surprised to been asked by Lady Rothschild to take part in this, the second Inclusive Capitalism Conference. And I'm very sorry, therefore, only to be with you in this somewhat disembodied way, for if today's meeting is anything like the astonishing event Lynn organized last year, then I'm sure it will provide much food for some badly needed innovative thought. Now, I don't somehow think you need me, ladies and gentlemen, to remind you how really critical this year is as the world seeks to establish vital new agreements on sustainable development and climate change. But in the perfect blizzard of meetings and events that surround these negotiations, it would be all too easy to forget the basic truth that no economy can thrive indefinitely without an inclusive society and a healthy natural base to sustain it. All financial capital ultimately relies 100% on the social and natural capital assets that underpin its existence and enable it to grow. It seems to me that the current conventional model by which we tend to operate is beset by two significant failures. The first is that it is not sufficiently inclusive in terms, for example, of generating meaningful employment for the young through measures such as providing apprenticeships and encouraging young entrepreneurs. And the second is that in its relentless pursuit of short-term profit, it fails to take into account the long-term consequences of resource depletion and climate instability. These dual failings of the current model are evident amongst other things in youth unemployment, widespread social exclusion, climate change, deforestation, and ocean acidification, all of which will inevitably have hefty economic price tags attached to them. It seems to me that rising to the challenge of keeping all forms of capital intact, and indeed in good long-term health, will require the active engagement of a wide range of players, many of whom are gathered here today. And among you are some of the world's most influential asset managers, asset owners and corporate CEOs who have the opportunity and ability to shape the new economic agenda that we will need if we are to cope with the future we are bringing at some considerable speed upon ourselves. A future that somehow will be required to accommodate 3 billion more people, a global economy far bigger than today's, and with it, all the attendant increased demands that will come for jobs, public services, and natural resources. According to so many scientists and specialists, we are already breaching a plethora of planetary boundaries, so the challenges are thoroughly daunting. In meeting these immense challenges, there are perhaps several broad ways forward. One is to be found in what is increasingly referred to as the circular economy, in which waste is eliminated and instead becomes a set of resources. Nature's own economy is circular and provides the perfect example of how we can render our own economy more resilient and sustainable. But this will have to include restoring and nurturing the ecosystems that provide us with the essential services upon which all economic activity ultimately depends. Finding ways of driving investment that will value and support these ecosystems is not merely one possible option among many others. It is an urgent necessity, a prerequisite for our survival, and one which grows in importance each day as we inexorably and with notable single-mindedness increase our food, energy, and water insecurity. In this regard, I am delighted that there appears to have been such an increase in the green bond market, with some expectation, I believe, that $100 billion worth of them could be issued this year. I have to confess that I take a rather proprietorial interest in that market's development, as some of its initial formulation occurred during the meetings of the P8 group of pension funds that I originally inaugurated some 8 years ago. Furthermore, my international sustainability unit has initiated the conversations around blue bonds, which I hope will lead to their first issuance this year. But as these instruments now, as requested, provide institutional investors with the same vanilla-type products that can scarcely raise the sensitive eyebrows of chief risk officers, they should and indeed must be used if we are going to mobilize the scale of investment required to keep us within 2 degrees of warming and reinstate our natural capital. But as this occurs, it seems to me that great care needs to be taken to ensure that their greenness, in other words, their environmental and social integrity, is guaranteed. We should celebrate that environmental services are now starting to be recognized as an asset class in their own right, but should be ever mindful of the complex web of social and ecological factors that sustain them and indeed us. In a year when it does seem as if the semaphore signals emerging from various policy conclaves are indicating that the long-awaited tough decisions are starting to be made, it is absolutely critical that the private sector stands ready to engage positively and with the full and astonishing capability of its intellectual and financial capital. You, ladies and gentlemen, are the people who can ensure that this happens. I can only pray that you do, for, to paraphrase Shakespeare, not to take this tide of opportunity will bind us in shallows and in miseries, for we must take the current when it serves or lose our and indeed your ventures.